Well, I was over in Afghanistan in 2010, invited as a group to go and visit troops. And it kind of started then when I thought, I've got to maybe do something with this. So it's really, stories get a hold of you and you can't let them go. And the only way you can let them go is to actually do something with them. I hope that everybody goes away thinking a bit more deeply about what it is we ask our soldiers to do on our behalf, and the unbelievably complex challenges that they're faced with, and the burden they carry, and the effect that has on them. You know, we sort of send people off to fight in foreign lands on our behalf. We don't really spend much time thinking about it, and it occurs to me that we ought to.
It is very much about the hearts and mind and the, what is it, kinetic?
The kinetic side of the war, that's the shooting part.
And showing also the Afghani side, which is not just, showing who we were going there to fight for and fight with.
We were in Afghanistan in a partnership. We weren't fighting alone, we were fighting alongside Afghans, and they worked with us on the intelligence side as well. So it has all of those things, and all of those agendas don't necessarily mix very smoothly. And that's really kind of at the heart of the complexity of modern warfare, and that's what we're asking our men and women in uniform to do. So I think you'll get a good sense of what it was we actually were doing over there for a very long time.
Yeah, the film doesn't necessarily offer answers, but certainly makes you ask, hopefully, a few questions. It certainly made me ask some questions.
That's important.
Yes, indeed.
So thank you.
Thank
you
you.
for your work, and congratulations again.
Oh, thanks a lot.
Thank you
It's a
very
pleasure
much.
to be here.
And now I'd like to introduce back to the stage Mr. Paul Gross and Mr. Ross Sutherland. I'm sure you enjoyed the film as much as I did the first time I watched it. Had an opportunity to catch just a few minutes before we left again, and it was really gorgeous on the big screen. But I know it's not all about how beautiful it looked. It was a very important story to be told as well. And so thank you all for sticking around for this question and answer. I'm sure you have a lot of questions for Paul and Rossif, and I'll just maybe start us off with one question. I'm curious to know for both of you how it was shooting in Jordan.
It was fantastic. Jordan is it's a very beautiful country with a varied landscape. The people are wonderful. We really did have a great time there, and we have many good friends from Jordan. The reason we ended up in Jordan is that I had actually had a plan to shoot some of the film in Afghanistan. Not down in Kandahar because it was too crazy, but at the time Kabul was comparatively safe. I even had meetings at CENTCOM in Ottawa to say if we could go, and they said, we don't want to try and protect you. So the military didn't want to do that, but we had sort of arranged it, and the only thing that stopped it was the insurance companies. Because they said, well, sure, you'll be completely covered until your plane lands in Kabul, and then you're on your own. So then we had to figure out where to go, and southern Kandahar is a very strange place, and the grape fields and that kind of landscape is not easily replicated. And we looked at Tajikistan, and we were looking possibly in Morocco, and then a friend of mine had worked in Jordan on a couple of films, Inshallah and Incendie, Denis Villeneuve's film, and he said, I think it might be there. So I did an initial scout, and we were actually coming down through Wadi Rum, the desert, and came out into this area, the area that we actually shot in, this vast plain that looked exactly like Kandahar. And I built a little cairn there, and that's actually where we ended up building the set 2 years later, but that's how we ended up in Jordan. And I think it was really terrific particularly for the actors, to be in a really foreign place. Most had not been in the Middle East. And I think if you I don't know, you can probably speak to that a little bit. Did it help?
Stick a microphone in my face. Yeah, sure. To be in a foreign land, these soldiers were fighting a war in a foreign land. I was quite nervous going to Jordan, as was my father, about his son going into Jordan. But it was a very peaceful region surrounded by turbulence. And I was actually very, very sick while this film took place, and the Queen of Jordan reached out to me to make sure that I got the proper health care. They treated us as one of their own, and
I was also very sick, but the Queen did not reach out to me. I think
I love this, the Queen of Jordan, wow.
yeah, it was quite an honor, and she's a beautiful woman, but she's married to the king. But
That's an aside. She was taken then.
she was indeed, yeah.
I should say, there's one thing I should say is that we had a fatwa against us. And it's not so bad, you know, you get one, you just shrug it off. I try to say that because I think it's funny. But actually, we did have a fatwa. We had, in that stunt where the car gets hit by a car bomb and it slides across the road, we hit a wall and damaged part of it, which we repaired in about 15 minutes, but it was a wall to a mosque. And apparently, not to a mosque, to a graveyard. And it caused a great deal of concern, and we were shooting in the slums of Aqaba. And so suddenly there was this to-do, and we had a fatwa. I didn't know about this until the next morning, and I could only think of Salman Rushdie. So when Fuad, our guy, said, yes, and you have a fatwa against you. What? A fatwa? And he said, not a Salman Rushdie fatwa, one below. So we were okay.
So, Paul, I have a quick question for you, and this is one I've been dying to ask you for a long time, and I think our audience is going to find very interesting as well. So, you wrote, directed, and acted in this film, correct? Mm-hmm. So, how do you handle that? That's a lot.
Well, you know, the writing you hope is finished before you start shooting. I mean, although we did change some things as we went along, obviously, but I don't know. I've become more used to directing and acting and directing myself. I guess it's not really like that, though.
Are you able to make yourself behave, or?
Yeah,
Not so.
I can make myself really concentrate, and it's very strange when you're editing because I refer to myself in the third person. I'll say he stinks in this. We need something where he isn't so bad, or does he ever smile, or you know those kinds of things you say. But the way you can do it is it requires a great deal of planning, and you also have to surround yourself with people who aren't afraid to tell you that you suck, and you really need that. And I had lots of people who told me that I was terrible, so that helped me. Like Rossif would occasionally.
Yeah, right, yeah.
All the time.
No, but it was kind of like, I don't know how to describe it. I think I said this earlier today to somebody. It's a bit like we would do a scene together, and then we'd look at the monitor, and then we'd kind of figure out how to fix it, or we'd give each other direction. So it's sort of like you're making a film in your basement, except we're making it in Jordan. But it's about the same kind of feeling of, it lacks the hierarchy that you're sort of accustomed to. At least I hope it did. So that's much more collaborative. I mean, in the end, I'm still the dictator, but there is a sense of, an illusion of collaboration. Should I put it that way?
I'm just wondering, I'm trying to see here, there's a little light in my eyes. I'm sure you guys have tons of questions, so let's turn it over to the audience. I'm looking for the first hand. Okay, oh, is that right here? Sorry. Can you see that? There we go.
How much of what we saw was based on what you actually learned when you were in Afghanistan? Like, is there a ghost, for instance?
How much is the story from stuff in Afghanistan?
How much of it was real, and is there a ghost?
There is actually a ghost. And I met him. He was the commander of the Mujahideen against the Soviets in the Arghandab region, which included the area that the film takes place in. Probably one of the most extraordinary guys I've ever met. They don't seem to know how old, he doesn't know how old he is. Afghans have kind of loose records. They don't have birth, it was such a tortured country that they're not really sure how old they are. They don't have that kind of record keeping. I met with the guy for about 2.5, almost 3 hours, and through an interpreter. But you know that feeling, or that expression when someone can suck the air out of the room? He was like that. I just thought, and I also thought, he's going to eat me. He could come across the table and eat me. He was like really imposing. And his actual story, the full length of it, is crazy. He was one of the great military commanders against the Soviets. And at the end of it, he did go back to his grape fields. And then when the Americans bombed and the forces started to move in, they kind of scooped up everyone who was a mullah. And he was, Mullah Malik was his name. And he was put into a cargo container in behind the Kandahar International Airport, which was all blown up and fairly derelict. And he was in there in this metal box for months at the height of the summer, and it'll get to 50, 52 degrees. It is spectacularly hot there. And nobody seemed to get any information out of him, and then they moved him up to Bagram Air Force Base where they tortured him for a considerable period of time. And still he was working with us because he felt that our objectives were more in keeping with the country he thought they should have. I did ask him about, so what was the worst? The worst stuff, he said, was the waterboarding. He could take almost anything else, but he couldn't take that. And he said, I had nothing to tell them. I didn't know anything. I was a grape farmer. And I said, well, how would you compare the coalition forces in general now to the Soviets? And he said, well, you're much better. At least you aren't raping everybody. But it's time for you to go. And I said, and if you were a younger man? He said, if I was a younger man, I'd be in the hills with Stinger missiles. It's time for you to go. And I thought, I got to call someone. We better get out of here. So yeah, he's a real guy. The cleaner is a real guy. He was always cleaning. He was known as the cleaner because he was probably the most important informant we had about activities in Kandahar City, the Canadian Forces had. And so his name couldn't really appear anywhere because there would be Taliban spies or sympathetic people inside the base and brigade headquarters, and they'd be looking for names on paperwork. So he was just billed as the cleaner and paid a lot of money, like way more than you'd pay an actual cleaner. But the story of him not, his family being in Kabul and him not sleeping in the same place 2-3 nights running is true. Most of the events are from things soldiers had told me. And I really do feel that all I kind of did was string it into an order that made sense as a narrative for a film. And then hope we could get a great cast, which I think we did, and it would fill it out.
Do you have some other questions right here?
Which was the most challenging scene to shoot?
For me as a director or for the whole production? For me as a director, actually, they all seemed enormously challenging, so I don't know if I could pick one out. I think the hardest stuff for us to shoot, really, for the camera team and for the performers were the battlefield sequences in the grape fields. Because the actors had, you should actually talk about that. He was wonderful.
Again, I was terribly sick when this was happening. They had me do a lot of ADR, but I hope there are no kids in the audience, but I was swearing all through my stunts. I was swearing to this man here for making me do this, but then again, I signed up for it. Those were the most heart-wrenching, the most challenging. Yeah.
And I think the most challenging thing about shooting was to try to do the whole film in 30 days. And it wasn't actually 30 days because in Jordan we only had 8 hours of sunlight, and it was a hard out at 4:15, it'd be dark. So we couldn't have anything go wrong, and I had to just keep pushing. And if anything had screwed up in there, I don't know if we'd finished the film. So there was this kind of constant pressure to get through it. But even saying that, I can't think of anything that was more fun than getting up in the morning to the call to prayer at 4:26, hitting the road and heading out into the desert and going to our village and having the breakfast in the Bedouin tents and watching some of the wacky Arab driving, which is really spectacular. Unless you've seen it, it's really hard to describe. And it was just a joyous thing to be doing every day.
Next question. Oh, right here.
I think it's more of a commentary. And thank you for such a really well-balanced film. I think it's very challenging today to present a balanced film. A lot of the media today always portrays the Wests as deserving what they get. There's not much sympathy for our soldiers, unfortunately, and we're portrayed as being colonists or exploiters, and the situations we're going into are our fault and so on. So I think it's, you know, history and wars are really a bloody, very bloody business. And I don't think there's any choir boys in all of this. So thank you very much for presenting what I consider to be a very balanced portrayal of an extremely complicated situation. You've got people living in, for the most part, illiterate people living in medieval times with up-to-date technology and so on. And anyway, I think you understand the spirit of what I'm saying. Thank you. It was fabulous.
Thank you.
Paul, it's an interesting question. I know that you were really trying to, just to build on your comment, I know that you were really trying to bring to light for Canadians the breadth and depth of an issue and of an action of Canadians that perhaps we don't understand. Is there anything that you wanted to offer to the audience in terms of what you hope they take away from this film?
No, I mean, I think that's really in the film, and if it affects you and makes you think a bit more deeply about what it is we do, and we're engaged with conflicts and our soldiers are being sent, then that's really what we were after, I suppose. And to do that, I think the big, sort of the prime directive was to be as authentic and accurate as possible. And I think without any real contradiction, say that I think this is about as accurate a portrayal, an authentic portrayal of what it was our troops were doing for a conflict that lasted longer than the First World War, Second World War, and Korean War combined. And it's a conflict about which we don't really know a lot. But this is about as good a representation of it as I think you'll find. And I say this only because it's been echoed by soldiers and veterans who've been there. So I feel it's really up to the audience then to determine whether or not they think it's something worth thinking about. But I hope you do.
Right here.
Scott Lenz, I appreciate it for your coming to Vancouver. As I saw you on the particular to you as Paul Gross. You have any political aspirations? Because right now is in the election years, but you're not making this film for political reasons, right? And any difference between Passchendaele and this one?
In terms of political aspirations, no. Although I would really like to pick up, Mike Duffy's Senate seat if that becomes vacant. No, I don't have any political aspirations. I think the big difference, obviously, is really just the difference of time. It's 100 years or so since Passchendaele to this film, and the world has changed in that 100 years enormously, so of course they're very different. I think Passchendaele was a bigger sweep in that it felt always to me as though there was a long tail to the Romantic era that was wiped aside by the First World War that gave birth to the modern era. And this is kind of postmodern. So if we think in terms of warfare, this is sort of postmodern warfare. And then it makes sense to me to kind of think of it in those terms because there isn't anything clear about it. It's almost as though the whole enterprise is deconstructed. But having said that, I will say that I think I see in soldiers a direct line, an unbroken line from the sands of Afghanistan all the way back through every conflict we've been engaged in to the formation of the Canadian Expeditionary Force in 1914, 1918. I think there is a continuity there that I think they're very mindful of and one that I've started to appreciate. Or Pam Wallen's seat, if that...
We'll just squeeze in one more question here.
Hey, Paul. First off, compliments on the film. I think it was incredibly beautiful.
Thanks.
It really was, and I also I had the good fortune to live in Kandahar, outside the wire, in the city itself, in 2006, 2007, and drove over Saddleback Mountain and Panjwai and the Arghandab Valley and flew up to Kabul many times and worked with our soldiers there and all the other ISAF soldiers. And I think that it was an incredibly realistic portrayal of what's going down there, and I thank you for that.
Thank you.
It's amazing that you accomplished that in Jordan, because after living in Afghanistan, I could have swore that I was there watching your film, so that's a very big achievement. I have one question, though, and that is that I'm a pacifist. I was there working for an NGO, and my one reservation is that, do you not worry sometimes that you're in some way romanticizing warfare and the machinery of war and violence?
You know, it's a very complicated answer, so I'll try and do it in parts. I think Truffaut said any film any film about war is inevitably a pro-war film, and years later Spielberg said any film, good or bad, about war is an anti-war film. I'm not sure where I sit inside the middle of that. I don't think that making a film about war romanticizes it or fetishizes it. I think war itself does that. Soldiers do it about their kit, their gear, the machinery is mesmerizing. That's just an objective kind of thing. Even if you are aware of what it's designed to do, it's kind of mesmerizing. Fighter jets are beautiful, even if you know that they're going to drop bombs. They're extraordinary machines. So I'm not sure that showing war necessarily romanticizes it. I think that war, the first poetic expression of Western civilization is the Iliad, and it's 24 long chapters of detailed hand-to-hand combat. That's where we began artistically, to a great extent, and it's been constant through our history. War is the human constant. Peace is much more elusive and difficult to maintain. I think to not look at it is even stranger than to avoid looking at it lest you should romanticize it. I think that our country was sort of blindly agreeable to a very long conflict without really probing as to why we were involved or being that interested. I think that's far worse than saying, here's what it looks like. This is what they do. Are we okay with that?
I agree. Well said, and a super, super beautiful film. Good job, guys.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you both for being here with us tonight, and Paul, obviously, for making such a beautiful and impactful film. I was told tonight that the theatrical release will be on October 9th, so please spread the word to friends and family to come out and see this film and support this film. And of course, again, thank you so much for being here with us tonight, and to all of you for being here to share this story with us. Thank you.
And thank all of you, and thank you, Jackie.
Thanks, Rossif.